I am so honored to be hosting this launch party. And when Liuan asked me, um, I, I just felt very honored. Liuan and I, we really just go back a couple years as far as knowing one another in person. I got to read this book in process probably a year and a half ago. And as someone who lives with chronic illness and chronic pain, it spoke deeply, deeply to me. And also, we actually sort of met years ago through our son, who she writes about at the very beginning of the book. His name is Jonan. So you'll read that at the very beginning. He was a stillborn baby, and it was very meaningful. Even just the other day, I read it again to my husband, this whole passage. It's extraordinarily meaningful to see his name in print, since his name is not anywhere else in the world. So I couldn't be more honored to help support this book, and mostly Liuan, because her insights and her presence and her writing also is absolutely transformational. I mean, it's been such a powerful book to me, and I have literally a Christmas list of people I'm buying the book for. So welcome. I know, Liuan, you want to start by reading an excerpt, and then we'll move into actually just a musical response. So if you want to go ahead and read that excerpt and get started.
Sounds good. Thank you guys all for being here. I wish we could be in person and be drinking hot chocolate and tea and eating cookies and hugging. But this also means that some of you guys from out of town can be a part of this as well. So this means so much for you guys to join me in celebrating. So we're in the season of Advent, and I thought I would read something from the book that speaks to this feeling of waiting for God to come to be with us, and being in that in-between place where we know the pain and suffering, and we also know that God both has come and will come again in human form. So I'm reading a section from chapter 9 in the book, which is called A Different Wholeness. Chronic illness is trauma. My own pain, as it dragged on, was an ongoing, low-level trauma that wore a rut into my body, my brain, my very sense of self. The fact that it had no foreseeable end added to my suffering. Psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk explains that situations become intolerable if they feel interminable. The nonstop pain made me want to jump out of my skin and away from my inflamed muscles and joints. But there was no escape. I could not run away from my own body. So instead, I dissociated. All of us who have made it to adulthood have dissociated to some degree. Though we come into the world as infants, fully present, reaching eagerly for every dirt clod and orange slice, at some point violence is done to us. Something cuts through that seamless integrity between inner and outer life, between various parts of ourselves. We discover, slowly or terribly abruptly, that the world is not a safe place. Even our bodies are not safe. At some point, it seems safer not to reach out, not to fully inhabit this fragile flesh and bone. Better instead to freeze, to self-protect. Stop feeling. Get out of the body, or at least try to control it. Cover over the limits, vulnerability, and potential for suffering, which the body represents. All of this freezing is understandable. Being in a body hurts, yet continuously walling ourselves off from pain, from the truth of our bodies, comes at great cost. While numbing or compensatory sensation seeking may make life tolerable, van der Kolk writes, the price you pay is that you lose awareness of what is going on inside your body and with that, the sense of being fully sensually alive. As we disconnect from the discomfort, we also lose touch with the very things that will lead to healing. Our culture, including church culture, has been in permanent survival freeze mode, perhaps since the beginning of the human story, when the first cosmic trauma was inflicted through the fall. But we don't need to be there anymore. We can come home to our bodies. We can recover. We can be whole. It seems preposterous, I know. Being in a body is just as dangerous and painful as it has always been. How do we come home to something that could and does hurt? Why would we think it's okay? What's changed? What's changed is that God is here now. Jesus came to be one of us in sweat and blood and gasps of pain. He is still one of us now, carrying our aches and cries in his own body. He was nearly obliterated by the heaviness of this life, ground down into earth, into Sheol, the pit. But he is here, meeting us past the point where we've given up and we thought it couldn't get any worse. Like a first responder on the scene of a terrible accident, attending to someone very close to death, he says, "Stay with me, stay present, I am here." Jesus is the antidote to our dissociation. In the garden, when Adam and Eve ate the fruit and their eyes were opened, they knew at once the danger of their human existence. At that moment, something was rent apart in their body and soul unity. I wonder if it felt like an out-of-body experience, watching themselves move the fruit to their lips, and all the while saying no. In the face of trauma, they dissociated. They froze. They stepped away from their bodies, away from their exposed nakedness, and covered up with fig leaves. This was a tragic separation, the first step in a long, grueling spiral of becoming less than human, less than whole. But they didn't just separate from their bodies. As the cool evening breezes blew in, God came walking in the garden to be with Adam and Eve. Hearing the sound, they hid. They ran from the gaze of a loving God for fear of being seen as they now saw themselves, naked, guilty, and ashamed. They chose to be apart from God because it was too uncomfortable to be seen up close. Perhaps they worried that God would reject them, so they made the first move. They turned away from God, going their own way rather than staying put. They chose not to wait for God, not to open up about what they had done, not to walk with God in vulnerability and trust. The rest of the Bible tells the story of what happened after that first trauma, what God has been doing ever since to heal the rift. Salvation, writes poet Scott Cairns, is a continuous process of being redeemed. It is our recovery from our chronic separation from God, both now and ever, and it includes our becoming increasingly aware of who our God is. I love the idea of salvation as recovery from our chronic separation from God. It makes clear that we are gravely ill, but not because we live in vulnerable bodies. It is because we aren't joined as we should be to the God who gives us life. Healing from this illness requires returning to God, or better yet, realizing that God has already come to us in the incarnation of Jesus Christ. Healing is receiving his presence in the here and now. Salvation isn't going up to heaven and escaping our bodies in this world. It's about joining with Jesus in the work he is doing right now in our stuttering tongues and awkward limbs. Our bodies, at once ghastly and glorious, are Christ's hands and feet. So this is how God saves us. In the incarnation of Christ, he joins himself to us, even in our less than whole state. For every step we take away from him, he takes a step nearer. We rejected our bodies as God made them, but God became a human body to be with us in our broken bodies. We denied our vulnerability, but God made himself vulnerable to suffering, pain, and death. We turned away, but God reaches out his arms toward us. We divided ourselves from God. God made himself one with us. Atonement, notes Cairns, comes from combining the words at one meant and was coined in the 16th century for the express purpose of reinfusing our theologies with a more vivid awareness of how it is that Christ saves us. He joins himself to us. If we are to accept this at-oneing work of Christ, it means we must stay put, stay present, when it would be easier to flee to an ethereal reality apart from pain and physical encumbrances. We can only receive Christ as the bodies that we are.
Thank you, Liuan. I'm not sure if I was the only other one crying as you were reading that as well. That was very powerful. And any of us here listening who live with chronic illness or pain and know the ongoing challenge that is to stay present. Your words are so appreciated and so necessary. I love that you have next Michael Fox. He has a musical response, I guess, if that's the right word, to this. And for us today, he is a lifelong, I don't know if it's a lifelong, but a longtime friend of Liuan's. He lives out in LA. He's a violinist and a music teacher, and he is going to maybe even just help us be with the words that Liuan just said and just receive the beauty of what he has to offer. So Michael, if you have anything to say, and if you want to bring us right into what you have.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I guess I really appreciated just Liuan's way of bringing a sense of wholeness and bringing sort of different parts of myself together as someone who's gone through some traumatic experiences, and as someone who really is trying to love Jesus very deeply, and as a creative individual. I think it's easy to kind of just lose myself in those different kind of aspects of myself, and I think this real returning to my body is something I'm really important and grateful for. And of course the thing is that of course I work with my body kind of all the time, and that's the main vehicle I use kind of as a musician. And I think that because I think that especially the neck and the shoulders and sort of the upper arms are a really common source of tension and aches, I think, for me and for a lot of people. But it's also what I need. And so I'm thinking sort of to start my performance, I'm gonna sort of peel back the curtain a little bit and do some of the exercises, the ways I used to loosen my body up, and make that kind of part of the music instead of something I do in secret, because it's just a recognition that this is something I am doing through my physical self. So I just hope that it somehow does this awesome book justice.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I feel like there's like a bunch of applause behind all of the muted microphones here. And probably some tears.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Liuan, I didn't know I was going to cry twice in here. Michael, when you moved into O Come Emmanuel, I mean, good. Oh, yes, it's such a cry of our heart, right? Especially in the season.
Feels,
In so many ways.
Appropriate for everything. Thank you.
And I love that you ended it on that note of unresolved note of still waiting. We're still here. We're not there yet.
Well, thank you. We'd like to, from there, move into our Q&A time. So Liuan has gathered some questions from various places, and some of basically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go through these, and if questions come to your mind, feel free to put them in the chat. I've got my chat open so I can see that, and I'll either interweave them into what we're doing or put them at the end. So if something comes up, throw them in there and we'll just move right along. So a lot of us are writers, or several of us, I can see through the list here, writers, authors, or in that genre somehow. And so this first question is, how did this book come about, and how did you find your way into it? Did you know from the beginning, or did it take some time? So talk to us a little bit about the inception of all this.
Yeah, so if you want to go way, way back, I started journaling when I was 7 or 8 years old. And so I've always been a writer. I thought in junior high and high school and college that I would be a journalist or go into anthropology. And then after college, a year after college was when I started having chronic pain. And there was a couple of years in there when I couldn't walk more than a block or two on any given day. And my body had been such a source of my identity in the past as both a dancer and an outdoors person. So losing that connection with the world as I knew it just plunged me into this period of depression, anxiety, questioning. And I finished my master's degree at the University of Chicago and realized that I wanted to write for more than an academic audience. So that's when I started doing some freelance writing and published a piece in Christianity Today's women's blog about just kind of briefly describing my experiences with chronic pain at that point. And then I started a blog called Body and Being, which was me just reflecting on what does it mean to be a body, and what are our bodies for? And so out of that blog, I realized I probably had enough material to write a book. And around that time was when I got connected with a group of women writers who write for Hermeneutics, which is the C2 women's blog. And some of them are on here now, I believe. I see Dorcas and Michelle there. And just being a part of this group of women who were already writing books and connected with people that had experience in the field gave me the confidence and I thought maybe I could do this too. So that's when it was about 5 or 6 years ago now, that the book idea came about. And I started to brainstorm and interview different people as part of the process. So it did take some time for the concept of the book to come about. But it was, I feel like it was just taking all these strands of, who I am and who I'm becoming and weaving them together.
What was it about the pain that made you want to write an entire book about it, like a Christian response to the pain?
Yeah. So at the beginning, when I started having pain, my feeling was that there's something wrong with me, that this is not what God intended, right? That maybe I need to do something to fix myself. And I remember going to the gym at Wheaton College sometime there, like when I was just super depressed and couldn't walk very far. And someone saw me limping and asked if they could pray for me. So I said, sure. And they put their hands on me and prayed for me. And they said, did anything change? And I said, no, I think I feel the same. And so they said, can I pray for you again? So they prayed for me again. And then they asked, now, did anything change? And I was like, no, I still feel the same. And so in that moment, like, me being a person in pain felt like I was something to be fixed, that I was like a project that people had to work on. And I felt like, in my book, I write that a lot about how our bodies are a source of wisdom and knowledge. And so if we're disconnecting from our bodies, we're losing some of that, what allows us to come to healing and to wholeness. So, just I felt in my bones that that was not the full story of how we ought to be as human beings and Jesus followers, following an embodied God in this world. And that's where I started thinking about, well, what does my body mean then? And what does my body in pain mean for the Christian life? And how does it connect with the gospel story?
So living with chronic pain and chronic illness, we know that this is like a journey, right? It comes and goes and it changes over time. So what was it like to live out that writing process and have to go back into those, you had to go back into these deeper stories, these deeper places where you're feeling this pain and experiencing it again. Mm-hmm. And, even you're in a better place. I know, for the most part, on the whole. And so what is that like to kind of go back? I know as someone who lives with chronic pain, like when I'm not there, I don't really want to go back and sit there and think about it and feel it again and feel the emotions. I'm just having a day or a week of relief, and I don't want to. I want to go forward. So talk about the writing process and writing about all that.
Yeah, it felt really scary actually to say I'm writing a book about chronic pain when some of the worst of the pain, I mean, who knows what could happen in the future, and I always want to hold that with open hands. But the worst, especially of the emotional pain, has passed, and I think that was some of the worst of it for me, not necessarily the physical pain, but all the gut-wrenching despair feelings that came out of the not knowing what to do with my own body and who I was anymore. So having come out of it, looking back in, it's not a comfortable place to be. And it feels really risky because it feels like I'm inviting God to like bring me back to those places. And I feel like I've often, when I'm starting something new or doing something ambitious, I have like these pain flare-ups, and they're just a reminder of who, like the body that I am. And so yeah, one of the things that I remember when I first wrote that introduction chapter and sent it into InterVarsity Press, the editors along with the proposal, was that they asked me, that they said it feels like you're like reflecting on this from like as if something that happened to you in the past, and we really want you to make this book feel like emotionally present to people, and we want you to bring in more stories of like what it was like you described that black hole feeling, like go deeper into that feeling of being in a black hole. Like, okay, here we go. So yes, I think it's been good though, because it's been a reminder to me that I haven't overcome this. This is still part of who I am, and I have to keep like going back and learning and coming at it from different angles. And I think that's our whole embodied journey, is we never get over having bodies and limits and being vulnerable as much as we want to get over it.
That's one of my favorite from the back, it's who says it, if you have a body or know someone who does, this book is for you. I loved that part of that review.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's so you're talking so much about the vulnerability. I mean, going deeper to the black hole. Oh, that just, wow. It's quite an invitation.
Yeah.
So there's so much vulnerability in your writing, and even in the articles, that you've written, and now this book. What can you talk a little bit about a vulnerability and writing, and the necessary but risky part of all of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of stories that I share that come from some of my most vulnerable moments. Like there's a story right at the very beginning that I share of having a panic attack, and that feeling of wanting to run away from my body, but I couldn't run away. I couldn't even run because my feet were hurting. So yeah, I think it helps because I've mentioned this before, that it's something that I have gained a little bit of distance from, just because of the time factor. Like I've had over a decade now where I've dealt with some form of chronic pain or another at different points. So at this point, I've processed a lot of it, and it's not as raw and as tender, because I think as a writer, it is really vulnerable and risky to put something that you're in the middle of, and that you're just in process of working out on your own. Like, who wants to put that out in public and have people comment on it publicly? Most of the things that I've written have been coming from places where I've kind of processed them, and I've thought about them, and come to some insights on them. So I remember being at the Festival of Faith and Writing back in 2014, and someone quoted, I think it was Richard Foster, who said, there's some things that you just keep between yourself and God. And I have to remind myself of that as a writer who's also on social media. And there's a lot of this, like, being vulnerable and putting yourself out there, stuff happening all the time, that I don't have to put it all out there. And there's some things that just need to marinate for a while. And maybe I'll come back to them in a month or a year or 5 years. And maybe at that point, they'll be in a form that I can offer to the world. So I would say for me, like, the risk of vulnerability, it's a little less risky, because most of the things that I write about, I feel like I've processed through already.
Yes. There's a wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. 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 So when you were revising this book, your draft, it was the beginning of the shutdowns in March of 2020. And so here you are doing this year. So just say a little bit of what it's like to finish writing a book in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah. So
or it's kind of like the whole world is broken, right? We have to all find our wholeness in a whole different way.
Yeah, it was really interesting to be writing about chronic illness and then have this pandemic happen, which is like a global chronic illness that's happening to everyone at once. And we lost our childcare. We had a nanny coming a couple of times a week, and she stopped coming. Our kids didn't have the tree house, which is the indoor playground that we take them to go to. They didn't have school to go to. So I was suddenly writing the book on weekends and evenings, which is not an ideal time to be staring at a screen. Not good for your whole, like, rest and body. But I made it through. And I remember my husband came up to me at some point and said, as I was working on like the second or third draft, it said, are you going to write about the pandemic? Like, it seems like it really connects with your book. And I thought, I think I should actually. That makes sense. So then I had to go back and kind of like think about limits and vulnerability and interdependence in the light of the pandemic. And then I wrote the epilogue as I was finishing up the book, like around May, I believe.
So yes, it is. What an amazing connection. I actually haven't read the end of that. The end. I'm still going through it. So I look forward to reading more. How have you connected with this, with the pandemic? There's a question that's come in as we're talking about editing, and so I'm going to kind of sneak it in right here. Mm-hmm. Helen, she wants you to share a bit more about what you talked about on the Every Voice Now podcast. And I don't know what that is. So I look forward to hearing about this, but about bringing more of your ethnic identity journey into the book over the course of your revisions and drafts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Every Voice Now is an initiative from IVP, my publisher, elevating authors of color and their voices. And the podcast features different authors of color and their publishing journey. So, kind of the hurdles they've had to overcome and how that publishing journey might be different from white authors and the different experiences. So, for me, I mentioned in that podcast that I came from a family that they didn't really encourage my writing, and I think my mom might be on here, but I know she registered, so she was supportive of me as a person, but I didn't feel that support as far as like, oh, I'm going to get an anthropology degree. She was definitely like, you should be a doctor or do something that I know will get you a job in the future. So it was risky for me to start writing without having that sense of support from my family, but also not having the connections that people might have if they've been in a family that has, been in the church or been in evangelical circles for a while. They have people that they know that they can reach out to kind of break into the publishing world. But I do think I stepped in. God's timing, I suppose you could say, at a good time where people have become more aware of the need for voices of color and people writing into their ethnic, maybe marginalized experiences that hasn't been there in the past. So having people like Helen. There's a group called the Asian American Christian Collaborative that I just did a Q&A with that are really working to bring what seems to be marginalized voices to the center, like saying like we need to listen to these voices and they're just as important as white authors. That has been so helpful for me as an author to have that support and to know that that I don't have to like gloss over those parts of my experience that might feel like, oh, I don't know if they're going to connect with white readers. But instead, like when I sent in the first draft, I had an anonymous outside reader who was a white woman come back and say, you talked about like your ethnic identity and like your family background in one part, but then you like sort of universalize it or gloss over it. And she was like, I really want to hear about that. So that cued me into the fact that those experiences are important. They're not just like things I have to leave to the side. Just the way like our bodies and our the things that we feel like are not central or normal, and then we don't want to bring those to the table. In the same way, like I think there's like a huge connection between our ethnic identity and disability and our like bodily identity. So like leaving your skin color to the side is the same thing as leaving your disability to the side. It's like it's part of your identity, but we often kind of like want to sequester those things to the side as not like who we are in public.
Yeah, thank you. That's a robust answer, and well, I'll keep going. So for the sake of time, because we do have some great questions continuing. So to take this, deeper into your body, the next question is about your experience with your body, and it says how have you learned to manage or work through these times of panic and feeling trapped in your body? And this is definitely a vulnerable question. Like you said, you start off the book with that story of your panic attack. And as someone who's lived through panic attacks, it's so overwhelming. It's so scary. How have you done this? And do you have any advice for people who are present? They're not processing that, right? They're actually just living it and trying to cope. So what can you say to that?
Yes. When your body is a source of pain, it's so natural to want to escape the pain. Some things that have helped me, because obviously you can't ever leave your body, but you can dissociate and kind of say, well, I'm going to like think about things in my mind. Or Miriam is the one who asked this question to me, and she mentioned going into audiobooks as kind of her way of escape. Um, I've really benefited from simply breathing. I know it's like so basic, but just learning to take deep breaths and in that breathing, and you and I worked on these coming home meditations that I have up on my website, and it's all about learning to pay attention to the breath going in and out of your body, and then to also start to tune into the other senses, like what are you smelling and feeling on your skin. And you use the word, which I really appreciated, a soft focus, when we were thinking about how to invite readers into this space of being present to our bodies. And that was really an interesting word for me, because it means like you're kind of like taking it all in at once. You're not just like honing in on, this is the part of my body that hurts. And that's really helped me as I like learned to meditate and stay present, that there's one part of my body that is causing me a lot of pain and heartache right now. But there's so many other parts of my body that are connecting me to the world. And I use my body to hug my kids, and I use my body to, do art and to take a bath and to eat good food. And those are all ways that I've sort of learned to just come home and know that this is an okay place to be. But also in the panic attack story that I told in the beginning, I had my husband come out. He came out after I like had this like guttural, like just panicky, like screaming incident after I was in the middle of my panic attack. And he just came from behind and hugged me and stayed with me. And so physical presence is so important, and having other people to say like, I'm with you, like you're not alone, and you're okay, you're going to be okay, has been so helpful. And I know not everybody lives with another person that can do that for them. But there's also these other practices, and we were made for community. So there's, I think what we experience in our body is an invitation to reach out and make those connections to other people.
That's so good, Liuan. Yeah, in one of our meditations that we did as a body scan to help kind of bring back, bring us back into that space and having that holistic, right? I love how you talk about we're not just focusing on the one part, but we're also not leaving it out and focusing on, let's just be grateful. Like we're just having the whole picture.
Yes.
That's beautiful. So kind of connecting these two pieces of both the writing process and then your, the other parts of your life. The question is regarding, your marriage relationship, and there was a little kind of an addition here, which I'll add it to this question. But, we're one person in the marriage, and I know this, one person is in the marriage and that has a chronic illness. And so there's extra, support needed, all of this, whether it's resources, emotional, physical, all of that. And, the other person does not in this partnership. What are the things that you and your husband have found helpful in balancing each other's needs? And then I guess I'll add the writing one after that, how it connects. But yes, can you talk about that?
Yeah. I think for all marriages, it's just helpful to lower the expectation that the other person is going to meet all your needs. And that's a pretty, I think, blown up expectation of what marriage is. I think in the pandemic, we can all recognize that we were not made to be in nuclear family, isolated households, that we were made to be a part of a tribe and a village. And so I think for me, that has helped to realize that, Matt's not going to be there for me 100% of the time, 24/7. And that's okay, because that's not his role. He's a human person with his own limits. And I don't have to expect that for him. So I can just have some grace for the times when he needs to sleep and I'm having a panic attack, and or whatever it might be. And also, it's not a zero-sum game. So I think we sort of think of like my needs and your needs are in competition. And when you meet your needs, then I'm not going to be able to meet my needs. And so we're just going to be stuck. Like someone's always going to feel like they're losing. and one of the things Matt and I have always made it a priority, whether it's negotiating needs or just talking about like what we want for the future, and we have different ideas of what we want, is that we never want it to feel like someone's like losing or kind of like not getting their voice heard, and the other person is winning, and one person is giving in and the other person is winning. And so when I think about our needs, and this is actually something we talked about, I mentioned your story in the book of how Kimberly, of how you came to see meeting your own needs as part of how you meet other people's needs, that once you're able to give yourself, kind of like feed yourself, then you were able to also like love your neighbor and love your kids and reach out to your community. But if you weren't able to first start with taking care of yourself, then you didn't have the resources to meet other people's needs. And that was such a helpful conversation that we had around what it means to be in a marriage relationship, but also parent and be part of a community as someone who has so many needs and issues that are coming up.
Right. Yeah. So with all of these needs, and like, I won't use the word competing, but we do have limited time, right? Mm-hmm. What is it like to, put this book in the world with all of this going on? Like, what was your self-care or your marriage and caring for your children and giving all these pieces attention during that process? How do you really live what you're writing in the process of it?
Yeah. With my kids, I had to just kind of live with good enough parenting. Like, this is good enough. They're not going to, maybe they'll have to go to therapy, and everyone has to go to therapy. It's okay to go to therapy. So if they go to therapy, that's fine. But I don't think that me like being away on the weekends or evenings is gonna like scar them permanently, and that I'm giving them enough. Like, my time with them, if I can kind of like batch like the time that I write my book, and then I can like turn from that and be with my kids, and it's so much easier said than done. And then I can be present to my kids. If it's an hour, that's fine. If it's 30 minutes, it's fine. You just kind of say, I am a limited human being, but if I'm able to give what I give out of the depths of my heart, then that's okay. And we'll make it. And I think for like everyone in the pandemic, I think we've been living that. It's okay. It's not the time to make the most of anything. It's just the time to accept that we are living in limits and with things outside of our control.
Mm-hmm. Yes, in the good enough of within those limits. Mm-hmm. So I want to continue to pay attention to time. I'm going to go to this question, kind of going back to when someone stops you, and says, "Can I pray for you?" And that awkward, like, am I, are you healed yet? Do you feel better? I have had that experience. It's so awkward. And you just want to tell them, yeah, I'm fine. So I'm so much better. So you'll go away. But what is it like?
Yeah.
Yes, I have had that feeling, at least. I can't recall if I've done it, but I definitely wanted to. What is it like for you to pray for physical healing for other people, whether just, even in your own prayer life or with somebody who's like, would you pray for me?
Mm-hmm. I just had this prayer experience with a couple of friends, and Emily, I think, is on here, Emily and Aaron, where we prayed for something. We were talking about prayers. We were hiking through Starved Rock, and then we prayed for something as we finished our time, and it actually happened. Like, we prayed for a delivery truck to be delayed. And when I got to the gas station, because I was running late to get this delivery, I got an email saying it was 25 hours. The truck was delayed for 25 hours. There's an Azure Standard order for Erica, who knows about Azure Standard. So I don't want to underestimate the power of prayer and what prayer can do. And I think for people that are living in chronic illness, it can be why are we even praying? Like nothing's going to happen, or like, I don't even know what I'm praying for, because I know this is going to keep going. It's not like I can pray for my limb to like grow back on. And that's sometimes what it feels like for people living with illness. Like, I don't know exactly what you're praying for me for, because like, this is my body. So like, how is that going to change about my body? So when I pray for others, one of the things I keep in mind is that it's okay if like their idea of healing isn't my idea of healing. God knows like what true healing is, and when I pray for other people to be healed, what I have in mind is hope. Like sometimes I think of it more as like pain relief. That kind of is a more helpful way for me to pray than like physical healing, as if healing means to like reset everything and go back to normal. Because as I write in my book, there's no normal. We don't have to go back to anything. Like our bodies are what they are right now. But I also think of healing as this physical healing is just one part of a larger healing that involves our bodies, but involves our spirits and involves our communities and involves the whole creation. So yeah, when I pray for healing, I think of all of those things, and God can do whatever he wants with those prayers.
Yes. Yes. The transcendent God continues, right? Hearing us all through our different theological lenses and all that. That's beautiful. So can you talk a little bit, as we're getting closer to the end here, how does this message of your book, of Hurting Yet Whole, connect with all of us, you know, where we're at as we're living through this pandemic right now? Talk to us about that.
Right. I think we're all living in this time of wanting to go back to what we think of as normal living. And I wanted that for so long, living with chronic pain. I just want to go back to the way things were before, when my body was reliable and I could come up with a plan, and I knew I had the physical ability to, you know, make my agenda happen. And we have to live now with, I think we're all coming to a realization of our limits, the limits of technology and medicine. I mean, even as there's a vaccine coming, I think we're realizing that the kind of healing that needs to happen in our communities is going to be something that requires more than a vaccine and is going to require all of us, right? All of us, as in all of us in the community, each one of us individually, but all of us as like we need to bring our whole selves to the table as we think about what it means to recover and to realize that recovering isn't going to be going back to normal. I hope it's not going back to normal. I hope it's a different kind of normal where we're more aware of our essential workers. Like so much of me living with pain was realizing I'm more than I produce. I'm not what I produce. Like I am valuable beyond what I produce. And like these days, we can see our essential workers working minimum wage, and is like, how do we value the people at the margins who are bearing the brunt of our vulnerability as a human society? And how do we come to terms with the fact that we can't just like make our GDP increase continually and exponentially forever? Like, what does it mean for us to say like we're human and we need to slow down sometimes and maybe stop sometimes? And I hope this season can be a time of kind of forced Sabbath and jubilee and rethinking what it means to live together.
Yes, that is, yes. It's that thing, I mean, of that desire to go backwards so bad to something that was. And it's like we've been in this pandemic so long that we're able to say, okay, what is next? How are we emerging differently at some point? Not that we're emerging yet, but the invitation is right in the middle, like smack in the middle of the pain.
Yes.
To this different kind of wholeness.
Yes, I feel like
beautiful. So the last question. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was saying like invitation is such a good word, like to see this time as an invitation, and whatever we're going through, whether it's the individual suffering or the communal suffering, as an invitation.
Yeah, I use that a lot in my spiritual direction practice. Lori, I probably have you to thank for that. So as our last question here, which has been such a rich time just to listen to you, what else do you want us to know, just to take away from reading your book? Obviously, that doesn't replace reading it because it's so rich and beautiful, but what do you want to share for us at the end here?
Yeah. So yesterday evening, we were meeting for the last time for our book discussion group, and I was so blessed by the responses that people had. I'm just going to name you Miriam because I loved what you had to say, that what I want people to take away is that your body matters, that you don't need to leave your body to the side in order to be whole, to be in this world and to be a meaningful member of this world. You don't have to leave your hurting, this uncomfortable parts of yourself off to the side, but they are actually where God meets us, and maybe central to our human experience, not marginal to our human experience.
Yes, thank you. Your book is so necessary. It is so necessary. I feel like it's put words to everything I've thought and processed over the last 7 years of my own journey. So thank you, Liuan. I know there's been many thanks coming in through the chat here. What would you like to just finish up, not with the questions, but just with our call? How do you want to an announcement, or just want to tell us where we can get your book and all of that?
Yes, so you can please buy my book and support me as a first-time author. You can get it on IVP's website.
Review.
That's right. If you are able to drop a review on Amazon and other book review sites, Target, Barnes & Noble, Christian Book, and share the book with people you know that you think would benefit from it. But most of all, thank you all for being here. It has been I feel like it's been a healing experience for me. Even as I was reading that excerpt from my book, I didn't realize how meaningful it was to suddenly be able to put my experiences in words, but also embody them in reading them out loud and having people receive them. So thank you for being part of my own healing journey. And I hope my words, my book, are part of yours as well.